And so I started, and my position when I started was Vice President of SEC reporting. So my job was supposed to just be, 10Ks, 10Qs, all of that kind of stuff, which is a pretty narrow responsibility. Within, I would say, like 6 months of starting the job, the CEO said, okay, Debbie's now in charge of investor relations. And I was like, Debbie doesn't know anything about investor relations. I mean, it really is its own skill set. There are laws about what you can and can't tell investors because you have to have even dissemination of information, and there's just all kinds of rules about it, and you're dealing with Wall Street analysts who are trying to get information out of you, and you're not really sure how much information that you can give them, and so Debbie was kind of like, Debbie's going to do what? And so I took that on. And then I would say a couple years into it, it just became really, really clear that I could not work for Jim Nicholson anymore. He was so intimidated by me, and he would do things like, the CEO would say, okay, Debbie's leading this initiative, and so, she's gonna have all the meetings and coordinate everything. And like the very next morning, I'd go up to Jim's office for something. He'd be having a closed door meeting about the thing that I was responsible for, that he'd invited over. And I'm thinking, how confusing this must be to everybody sitting in that room when they listen to the CEO say Debbie's in charge, and then the very next day they're in a meeting that Debbie's not at. So it was just, and he was very intimidated by the COO, and I kept getting caught in the middle between what each of them wanted me to do, and I thought, this is crazy. So
how did you handle that?
Well, about the same time, another former client called and said, can we have breakfast? I was like, okay. So we had breakfast, and he's like, we have this job, we'd like for you to take it. And I was like, okay, well, give me the specifics, what's the salary? And he's like, you just tell me what the salary, you want the salary to be, and that'll be the salary. I was like, I'll have to think about that. And this client had other issues, and it was a further commute and all of that, but when I told the COO at Paula that I was considering taking this position, he was like, you have to talk to Jeff first. And Jeff was the CEO, who I hadn't had a ton of interaction with at that point in time. And so I talked to Jeff, and he was like, okay, tell me, how much is it going to take to keep you here? And I was like, well, to be perfectly honest with you, it's not the money. That's why I'm looking to leave. I can't report into Jim anymore. It's not working. So he said, well, if I changed the reporting relationship so you reported directly to me, would you stay? And I said, yeah. If we changed that reporting relationship, I'd stay. So we changed the reporting relationship, and then I took over other budgeting things, and it started a process of working with Jeff that was he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met, and just a great business mind. So working with him is probably what kept me there through the whole process. Then a couple of years after that, at the time I went there, we had an insurance company and an insurance agency. And the insurance company, I don't know if any of you know, workers' comp in California has been a horrible environment. And in 2002, there was a ton of California-only companies that failed. And one of those companies that failed was our insurance company. So we went through the whole process of having it taken over and separating out the insurance agency operation, which was probably the most challenging part of my whole career, just stepping up and doing the right thing and being present when you're the face of management, and people are getting laid off and people are losing their jobs, and just that whole transition with dealing with the state and acting with integrity and all of that. So we transitioned to an insurance-only agency operation in 2002, and that's really when I took over the CFO type role, and because Jim left in that whole transition, thankfully. And then in February of this year, our parent company sold the insurance agency to Ascension Insurance out of Kansas City. That's a startup operation that is looking to build an insurance agency platform that has like $200 million in revenue. So we were talking to them about the deal and all of that. One of the conditions was that I sign an employment contract, which I've never actually had to sign my name on an employment contract and say I'm going to be your employee for X period of time. And in the process of negotiating that, they offered me a position in Kansas City to be the CFO over the whole organization, and I turned them down because I just really feel that Pasadena is where I belong, that LA is where I belong, and it just, some promotions just aren't the right thing. So now, they said, well, then you'll have to settle for regional responsibilities, and I was like, I'm okay with that. And so yeah, so I'm in charge of all the financial aspects of Pan American, so the budgeting, the financial reporting, but more than that, and why I really pushed for the SVP title in addition to the CFO, is I just don't want to be the financial person. I want to be involved in the operations of the business. So I'm involved in all the operating decisions, have contact with customers, have contact with carriers, and get to work when Kansas City is looking at buying new agencies. I get to be part of that diligence team. So Kansas City really doesn't have anybody that actually has ever worked in the insurance industry other than the CEO. So I get to go meet people and talk to them about their business and make recommendations about whether we should or should not move ahead. So that's what I do. You know, I think it sounds simple, but I really think it comes down to your work ethic. If people know that you work hard and will work hard at something, and that you're reliable, that if you say you're going to do something, you follow up with what you say, you don't leave them hanging. I always viewed my job as making my boss look good, or making my boss's job a little easier. And so just following through with what you're saying you're going to do, and do a good job. I mean, we all know when we put our best into something and when we do something halfway. And I think people know the difference too. I have come to realize, I had a real tendency early in my career to be a workaholic. Like, I really had a hard time early at KPMG, which probably is why it wasn't a very healthy environment for me, because it fed way too much into my ego, because I was really good at it, and it was a big firm, and so it just was not healthy. And thankfully I had the high schoolers that pulled me away, but when I look back on it, they got the leftovers a really lot of the time. And I think I've just with time come to realize that no one is ever going to look back on their life and go, man, I wish I spent more time at work. And how much are you sacrificing by just, even when you're not at work, being consumed by work? So I think over time I have just gotten better at trying to distinguish between, there are certain times where work is just going to have to take priority. When we were selling the company, you know, when the phone rang at 6 a.m. or when people called you on Saturday, it was a big deal, it was a big transaction. But just making sure that that wasn't my life. So I really now try and leave work at work and just let that be work. Oh, I work with men who have a real hard time taking direction from a woman. I mean, the insurance agency business has been a male-dominated business for a very long time, and in my company when I started, I was the very first woman vice president that they had ever had. Wow. I mean, it had always kind of been male-dominated, and there are certain personalities, and it bugs me. I mean, I recently sent an email to someone saying something as simple as, you know, you stopped using the company's selected vendor for office supplies, please go back. You're not using it, is impacting the cost for everybody. And he basically sent me back an email telling me he didn't want to do what I just told him to do. And so I sent him back an email that said, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear, it wasn't a suggestion. And he like pitched a royal fit, sent a really nasty email about, did it make me feel good to have this power trip and all of that? And you know what I did, how I handled it is I just replied back to him and said, I'm not rising to the bait. And then I got back what he said was an apology that was not an apology, but acknowledging that he would do what he was asked to do nicely in the first place. So I think it's just a matter of realizing it's their issue, it's not my issue, and they're the ones that are going to have to to work through it. And the fact of the matter is they can't do what I do, so they're just gonna have to live with it.